In the midst of a heated economic debate that's gripping Wall Street and Main Street alike, President Donald Trump is trumpeting a fresh government report like a victory lap, claiming his bold tariffs will slash the federal debt by a whopping $4 trillion over the next decade. Tariffs are bringing in billions, more than anyone thought possible, and we're paying down debt like never before. Trump posted on Truth Social last week, sharing the analysis for the umpteenth time. But hold on. Economists are hitting back hard, calling his promise that foreign companies foot the bill a flat-out myth, while warning that these import taxes could spike inflation, slow growth, and even undercut the very revenue they're supposed to generate. As American families grapple with higher prices on everything from cars to coffee, this tariff saga is reshaping the economy in real time, potentially costing households thousands and businesses billions. Key points to grab your attention. First, the Congressional Budget Office (CBO) projects $3.3 trillion in direct tariff revenue from 2025 to 2035, plus $700 billion in saved interest, totaling $4 trillion in deficit reduction, but that's assuming no major disruptions. 42-second. Studies show U.S. consumers are already absorbing up to 67% of tariff costs, debunking Trump's claim that foreigners pay. 0-third. Tariffs could boost inflation by 0.5-1% annually, shave 0.4-6% off long-term GDP, and trigger retaliatory measures from trading partners that slash U.S. exports by billions. 11-fourth. Actual revenue hinges on factors like sustained tariff levels, import volumes, economic backlash, and global reactions, meaning the $4 trillion windfall might fizzle if trade wars escalate. Dive in with us as we unpack the hype, the hard data, and the hidden risks in this high-stakes economic gamble. Picture this. It's August 2025, and the U.S. economy is humming along at 2.8% growth in the second quarter, with unemployment at a low 4.1% and stocks near all-time highs. 31 Yet, beneath the surface, Trump's tariff blitz, slapping 10 to 60% duties on goods from China, Mexico, Canada, the EU, and even allies like India, is stirring up a storm. The president, fresh off his re-election, has made tariffs a cornerstone of his America First agenda, vowing to protect jobs, boost manufacturing, and fund everything from infrastructure to tax cuts. And now, armed with a new CBO report released on August 22, he's got ammunition. The nonpartisan watchdog estimates that higher tariffs will rake in $3.3 trillion in primary revenue over the next decade, reducing borrowing needs and trimming interest payments by another $700 billion, for a grand total of $4 trillion in deficit cuts. 39 That's up from earlier forecasts, thanks to recent hikes like the 50% levy on Chinese electronics and 25% on Indian steel. Trump wasted no time blasting it out. CBO says my tariffs will cut deficits by $4 trillion. Fake news said they'd hurt us, wrong. His posts have racked up millions of views, fueling rallies where supporters cheer the idea of making foreign nations pay their fair share. But let's pump the brakes. While the CBO's numbers sound impressive, they come with big caveats. The projection assumes tariffs stay in place through 2035 without legal challenges or policy reversals, yet courts have already struck down some duties, like a recent ruling against Trump's emergency tariffs on EU goods, calling them overreach. 27 More crucially, it doesn't fully account for dynamic effects, how higher prices might curb consumer spending, slow business investment, or provoke retaliation that shrinks import volumes, and thus revenue. Economists at the Federal Reserve warn that a broad tariff scenario could reduce global GDP by 0.8%, with U.S. growth taking a 0.4% hit by 2028. 25 If imports drop sharply, tariff collections could fall short by hundreds of billions, turning that $4 trillion into a mirage. At the heart of the controversy is Trump's long-standing promise: tariffs are paid by foreign countries, they eat the cost. He's repeated it ad nauseum, from campaign trails to Oval Office briefings. But economists across the spectrum, from liberal think tanks like the Tax Policy Center to conservative voices at the Cato Institute, say that's simply not true. Americans pay for tariffs, declares a recent Wharton School analysis, estimating that U.S. firms and consumers bear 86-95% of the burden. 2. How? When a tariff hits, importers, often U.S. companies, pay the duty upfront at customs. They then pass it on through higher prices or slimmer profits. Data from the Peterson Institute for International Economics shows that since January 2025, tariff revenues have totaled $93.9 billion, but that's come from American pockets, contributing just 1.8% to federal revenue while adding $1,300 per household in extra costs. 16 Goldman Sachs economists crunch the numbers. Through June, consumers absorbed 22% of costs, but that's climbing to 67% as companies like Walmart and Target hike prices on tariffed goods. 4 Take sneakers from China. A 60% tariff might add $20 to $30 to the retail price, paid by you at checkout, not Beijing. Real-world stories bring this home. In Michigan, auto parts manufacturer Jane Thompson of Thompson Auto Supply told CNN her firm is shelling out $2 million more annually on imported steel due to tariffs on Canada and Mexico. We're not passing it all to customers yet, but margins are razor thin. We'll have to soon, she said. Farmers in Iowa are reeling from retaliatory tariffs. China's 25% duty on U.S. soybeans has slashed exports by 15%, per USDA data, costing $10 billion in lost revenue. 32 And consumers. A family of 4 might pay $2,000 extra yearly on groceries, electronics, and cars, according to the Tax Foundation, eroding wage gains from Trump's tax cuts. 20 inches It's a tax on Americans, plain and simple, says Stanford economist John Taylor, echoing a consensus among 90% of surveyed economists who view tariffs as net negative. 19. Now, on inflation, Trump's tariffs are already fanning the flames. July's CPI report showed core inflation ticking up to 3.2%, with tariffed categories like appliances and vehicles leading the charge. 36 The San Francisco Fed estimates tariffs could add 0.5% to inflation for consumption goods and 1% for investment items, as higher input costs ripple through supply chains. 24 Why imported components get pricier, forcing manufacturers to raise prices or cut jobs. Deloitte predicts this sneakflation will slow Federal Reserve rate cuts, keeping mortgages above 6% and auto loans pricey, hitting millennials hard as they buy homes. 34 In a worst-case scenario, if tariffs spark a full trade war, inflation could surge to 4 to 5%, echoing the 1970s stagflation era. Economic weakening is another red flag. The Warden model projects Trump's tariffs could shrink long-run GDP by 6%, wages by 5%, and hit middle-income households with a $22,000 lifetime loss. 30 That's because tariffs disrupt global supply chains. U.S. firms face higher costs, reducing competitiveness. J.P. Morgan Global Research notes that while tariffs might boost some domestic production, like steel jobs up 5% since January, overall investment dips as uncertainty looms. 23 The IMF downgraded 2025 global growth to 2.8% partly due to U.S. tariffs, with ripple effects on American exporters. 71 Small businesses, per the SBA, report 28% struggling with higher costs, potentially leading to 500,000 job losses in affected sectors like retail and agriculture. Federal revenue. It's a double-edged sword. On paper, tariffs have collected $183.1 billion so far in 2025, per Treasury data, enough to fund parts of Trump's infrastructure push. 27 But dynamic factors could erode that. First, import surges before tariffs hit. Firms stockpiled $100 billion in goods pre-hike, per Warden, temporarily boosting revenue but setting up a future drop. 65 Second, avoidance tactics. Companies reroute via Vietnam or Mexico, dodging duties, reducing collections by 10 to 20%, says the Dallas Fed. 67 Third, retaliation. EU and Chinese countermeasures have widened the U.S. trade deficit to $800 billion, cutting export revenue and offsetting tariff gains. 32 Fourth, economic drag. Slower growth means less income and sales tax revenue. Yale's Budget Lab estimates $475 to $582 billion in negative dynamic effects over a decade. 22 If GDP falls 0.8%, as Fed models predict, federal coffers could lose $200 minus $300 billion annually in broader taxes. Trump's defenders push back. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt argues tariffs are strategic, creating 100,000 manufacturing jobs and forcing fair trade. Without tariffs, we'd be destroyed. Look at the revenue pouring in. Trump echoed in a Fox Business interview. 27 Some economists, like those at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, note tariffs could rise to 1.5% of GDP monthly before plateauing, providing a buffer against the $37 trillion national debt. 68 And in states like Pennsylvania, steel mills are booming, with output up 8%, a win for blue-collar voters. Yet, the broader picture is murky. Global trade realities mean retaliation offsets gains. Mexico's 20% tariff on U.S. corn has cost farmers $5 billion. 76 businesses are adapting. Geodis advises reclassifying products to lower duties, but at a cost, with compliance up 15%. 77 McKinsey warns tariffs could shift $1 trillion in trade flows, hurting U.S. ports and logistics. 74 For consumers, it's sneakflation. Prices creep up quietly, as seen in a 5% rise in appliance costs. 0. Looking ahead, the $4 trillion question looms. If tariffs endure and economies adjust, revenue might hit targets, but experts like NPR's economics team say costs are split, with exporters absorbing some but Americans most. 8. The BBC tracks a widening trade deficit, undermining Trump's goals. 6. As 2026 midterms approach, voters will weigh pocketbook pain against protectionist pride. Trump calls it a beautiful policy, critics, a costly illusion. Either way, this tariff tale is far from over, with trillions, and America's economic future, on the line. Expanding on the SIBO's optimistic baseline, it's worth noting the agency revised upward from June's $2.8 trillion estimate due to new hikes, like the April 8 blanket tariffs. 53 But Yale's Budget Lab, incorporating retaliation, pegs net revenue at $2.10 minus $2.7 trillion, $1 to $2 trillion short. 60 Factors like currency fluctuations play in. A stronger dollar from tariffs makes imports cheaper pre-duty but reduces export competitiveness, per Fed notes. 63 Legal battles add uncertainty. If SCOTUS upholds challenges, revenue could plummet 20%. Economists, debunking of Trump's foreign pay myth draws from empirical studies. A 2019 Cato review found 95% pass-through in Trump's first term. Now it's 86%, but still dominant. 2 Bloomberg data shows U.S. companies like Apple absorbing hits on iPhones, then raising prices, consumers pay indirectly. 7 Harvard's Kennedy School explains, tariffs are taxes on imports, collected by U.S. Customs, funneled to Treasury. Foreign firms might lower prices to compete, but rarely fully. 38 In rare cases, like some EU exporters, absorption reaches 20%, but overall, it's American pain. Inflation's tariff link is data-driven. FRBSF models show investment goods prices up 1%, feeding into broader CPI. 24 CBS News notes 4 reasons inflation hasn't soared yet: stockpiling, profit squeezes, dollar strength, and gradual pass-through, but it's coming. 13 RBC Wealth Management forecasts labor market strain, with unemployment potentially rising 0.5%. 70. On economy, CEPR columns highlight state-level hits. Midwest ag states lose most from retaliation, while tech hubs like California suffer supply disruptions. 76 Grant Thornton advises businesses to diversify suppliers, but costs rise 10 to 15%. 72 UC Davis sees potential 5% budget offset but warns retaliation erases gains. 35. Revenue realization factors. Bipartisan Policy Center tracks avoidance via reclassification, reducing yields 5 to 10%. 75 Richmond Fed estimates short-term surges but long-term declines as trade reroutes. 37 Wikipedia notes average tariff rate at 27%, highest in a century, driving behavioral changes. 73 Time Trex projects $2.4 trillion gross but nets lower after dynamics. 78. In sum, Trump's tariff triumph may be premature. While SIBO's $4 trillion dangles like a carrot, economists' warnings of consumer costs, inflation spikes, and revenue pitfalls paint a riskier picture. As one Fortune op-ed quips, tariffs aren't free money, they're a national sales tax in disguise. 26 For Americans, the real question, is the protection worth the price?